It's been 55 years since humans first walked on the moon. That was a moment that really promised to open up the stars for us, didn't it?
Absolutely. If you'd asked anyone back in '69 what the next 50 years would look like, they'd probably have imagined moon bases, Mars colonies.
Maybe even cities orbiting Earth. But instead, it felt like we kind of lost our nerve.
The Apollo program just faded away, budgets got slashed, and that whole dream seemed to dissolve.
NASA shifted focus, didn't they? Towards robotic missions, satellites, really important stuff. Yes, but maybe more observational.
Yeah, more looking than touching, perhaps. The dream of deep exploration got put on the back burner, filed under distant future.
And then almost out of nowhere, a private company comes along and completely shakes things up. SpaceX isn't just launching rockets, they're forcing us to confront a question we've dodged for decades.
Are we stuck here on Earth forever, or are we meant for something more?
Exactly. What if that ambition, that drive to expand into the cosmos wasn't dead? What if it was just waiting for the right spark?
That's the core question, isn't it? And the material you've brought for us today dives right into that possibility, that spark that could reignite that old ambition. We've been looking at documentation about the future of space exploration, specifically focusing on the plans and the vision for Mars colonization, driven primarily by SpaceX.
Right.
And the fundamental question that comes out of these sources is pretty direct, pretty provocative. Will humanity stay bound to Earth? Or will we actually become a multiplanetary species?
Precisely. And for this deep dive, our main source is a video from the YouTube channel, The Tesla Space, titled, Why SpaceX Will Break Reality. Quite a title.
It certainly doesn't pull any punches.
So our mission today is to unpack the key ideas, the proposed steps in this material for actually establishing a human presence on Mars.
We want to understand the reasoning behind it, the huge challenges involved, and what the future implications might be. We'll be sifting through those really ambitious goals and the practical hurdles standing in the way.
Okay, let's start digging in. Let's begin with the why. What's the urgency? What's the big vision driving this push for Mars?
Well, Elon Musk's central argument, as laid out in the source, really boils down to needing a second planet as an insurance policy, a backup against the existential threats humanity faces.
Like asteroid impacts, nuclear war.
Supervolcanoes. He apparently put it very bluntly in that Joe Rogan interview, cited in the video. We need another planet to safeguard our civilization.
Just straight up survival.
Pretty much. He argues it's only a matter of time before we face some catastrophe on that scale. And it's not just fear-mongering. If you look at Earth's history, extinction-level events are, the norm, not the exception.
The dinosaurs didn't have a space program.
Exactly. But we do. The question is whether we use it in time. It's a sobering thought, isn't it, that the long-term survival of our species might actually depend on making this leap.
Wow, yeah. That really carries weight. Pure species survival.
Yeah.
But I get the feeling there's more to the motivation than just that, right? There's also an element of progress, of avoiding stagnation.
Correct. The source also brings up that historical perspective. Civilizations that stop expanding don't just stay still. They tend to decline, even collapse.
Think about the great empires.
Right. They thrived while exploring, pushing boundaries. Those that turned inward often crumbled. Musk seems to see Mars as that next great frontier, the challenge that will drive humanity forward.
A new promised land to shake us out of potential complacency here on Earth.
Sort of, yeah. That's the idea presented.
And SpaceX's answer to this massive why is a very specific tool. The Starship. Tell us about this vehicle that's supposed to change everything.
Starship is absolutely the cornerstone of the whole plan. It's designed as a fully reusable rocket made of stainless steel with this incredible capacity, potentially over 100 people per flight.
And the key is that reusability.
Totally key. It's not meant for just one epic mission. It's conceived as an interplanetary workhorse, a vehicle for regular, relatively cheap transport of people and cargo between Earth and Mars. Think of it like a supersized space shuttle, but for going much further. That reusability is what could theoretically bring the cost of space access way down, making a project on the scale of Mars colonization actually feasible. Imagine the cost difference between a reusable airplane flight and building a new plane for every single trip.
Makes sense, because it's not just about getting there once, it's about sustaining a presence. And the source paints a picture of Mars that's, well, not exactly a walk in the park.
Calling it hostile is an understatement. Mars's atmosphere is incredibly thin, mostly carbon dioxide, barely 1% of Earth's atmospheric density.
No breathable oxygen.
None. And crucially, no global magnetic field to shield against harmful solar radiation. Water exists, yes, but it's mostly locked up as ice underground or trapped in potentially toxic brine deposits.
So even though Mars might have had liquid water, maybe even life in the past?
Today, no human could survive there without a spacesuit and a proper habitat. The source puts it quite graphically. It'll likely be over 100 years before you could just, pop down to the shops on Mars.
Okay, so long before the first astronauts arrive, there's a massive amount of prep work needed. The source details a pretty ambitious multi-stage plan for this.
That's right. It unfolds in phases, starting with sending uncrewed starships packed with essential supplies. Things like power generation systems, storage, basic infrastructure for the future colony.
And notice the plural. Starships, not just one.
Exactly. To make it work, to transport the sheer volume of stuff needed, they'll require multiple simultaneous launches. This is partly dictated by orbital mechanics. That window of opportunity to travel to Mars when the planets are relatively close only opens up roughly every 26 months.
And the trip itself takes quite a while.
Estimated between 80 and 150 days, depending on the trajectory, so you need to send a lot when you have the chance.
So what's in these initial cargo ships, like a giant interplanetary survival kit?
Something like that, yeah. The cargo list would include things like high-efficiency solar panels for power, energy storage units for continuous supply, specialized drills to get through that frozen ground to the water ice.
And prefabricated structures.
Pre-built habitats, yes. Initial shelters for the robotic gear, and later for the first human crews.
And this is where automation comes in, right? Robots taking the lead, preparing the ground before people arrive.
Correct. Once the cargo lands autonomously, a series of pre-programmed systems would kick in. Robotic rovers would unpack and set up the solar arrays. Automated plants would start processing the CO2 atmosphere to produce breathable oxygen.
Like the Martian, but automated first?
Kind of.
Yeah.
Drills would access the subsurface ice, which would then be processed maybe by Tesla bots, the source mentions, and stored in tanks. Basic connections would be made. Habitats linked to fledgling oxygen and water grids, powered by the solar arrays and batteries.
All this before any human steps onto Mars.
It's the essential foundation for their survival. Has to be done first.
So when that first crew, maybe a dozen people, the source suggests finally arrives on a Starship, what's their main job? Plant a flag and take some photos?
Their initial role would be far more practical, focused squarely on survival and setup. Their primary mission: get the robot install systems fully operational, maintain them, repair them.
Just getting them there and back safely would be a huge achievement.
Absolutely enormous. These first astronauts wouldn't just be explorers, they'd be survivalists, testing the limits of human endurance in a truly alien place.
Living in those prefab habitats.
Protected from radiation and extreme temperatures, yeah.
Yeah.
Their goal would be to start building more permanent bases, maybe digging underground and expanding those crucial life support systems.
And the long-term vision is way beyond just a small outpost, isn't it? Forget a little science lab.
The goal described is continuous, exponential expansion. Those initial small pressurized habitats would eventually give way to large-scale, self-sufficient farms, underground shelters shielded from radiation, and an infrastructure increasingly independent of Earth.
And Musk's timeline for this?
By 2050, the ambition is to have established a city of 1 million people on Mars.
1 million people.
Not a temporary research station, not scientific outpost, but a permanent, self-sustaining civilization.
It sounds like epic sci-fi. But the source also brings us back down to Earth, so to speak. There are major hurdles, massive uncertainties.
Oh, absolutely. Starship's own development has hit plenty of snags. Those test flights often ending in rather spectacular explosions.
You've all seen the videos.
Right. And NASA's Artemis program, which was supposed to sort of pave the way for a moon-to-Mars connection, has also faced significant delays.
Funding, politics, engineering challenges.
All of it needs to align for this dream to become reality. The source makes it clear. If SpaceX doesn't achieve major milestones on Mars within the next decade or so, this whole vision of a thriving Martian colony could start to look more like a pipe dream.
And then there's the really big idea, terraforming. Turning Mars into a second Earth, making it habitable so we could breathe the air, farm the land. Sounds amazing, but what does the source say about its feasibility?
Well, the basic concept of terraforming is to radically transform the red planet. It would involve things like melting the polar ice caps to release water, pumping huge amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere to raise the temperature and pressure.
And eventually create an oxygen-rich atmosphere we could breathe.
That's the dream.
Yeah.
Theoretically, if you could overcome the immense technical and the economic challenges, it might be possible in the very, very long term.
But
the source presents some pretty strong scientific arguments against full terraforming being viable anytime soon, or perhaps ever. Mars simply doesn't seem to have enough CO2 locked away in its rocks and ice caps to create a thick, warm atmosphere like Earth's.
not enough raw material.
Seems not. And even if we could somehow artificially generate a breathable atmosphere, the lack of that global magnetic field is a killer problem.
The solar wind.
Exactly, it would just constantly strip away any atmosphere we created, slowly eroding it until the planet was almost airless again.
So, large-scale terraforming looks like a fantasy, at least for now. What's the more realistic alternative for humans living relatively comfortably on Mars?
The more viable, near to medium-term approach would be creating artificial habitable environments. Think pressurized cities under giant transparent domes, or extensive underground habitats dug into the Martian subsurface for protection.
Like islands of human life, shielded from the outside.
Essentially, yes. You wouldn't be changing the whole planet, but building a network of protected human settlements.
Which leads to a fascinating question. What might that future Martian society actually be like? The source speculates on some unique characteristics that could emerge.
It's a really compelling thought experiment. Imagine being born and raised under a pale orange sky, in a world with only about a third of Earth's gravity, no vast oceans, no shared geological or biological history connecting you back to Earth, at least initially.
Over time, things would inevitably change.
Their culture, their politics, maybe even their biology could diverge from their Earthbound ancestors. You might see new languages, new customs, new beliefs develop, shaped by their unique environment.
Their art, their ethics.
All likely influenced by resource scarcity, the constant environmental danger, the need for extreme interdependence just to survive. At some point, they might stop thinking of themselves as Earthlings living on Mars and just become Martians.
And when that happens?
Earth wouldn't be home anymore. It would just be another planet in the solar system.
Now, SpaceX isn't the only player with eyes on Mars. The source mentions others in this emerging 21st century space race.
Definitely. China has set an ambitious timeline, aiming for crewed lunar landings by 2033, and their lunar program is moving forward steadily. With strong government backing, they might be less dependent on the ups and downs of private investment or long-term public support.
And NASA.
NASA still officially targets sending astronauts to Mars in the 2040s, but changing administrations and shifting priorities could see their plans adapt, especially given SpaceX's progress.
What about Blue Origin?
Jeff Bezos' company seems to be taking a different approach, focusing more initially on developing space stations and utilizing lunar resources.
Against smaller players.
Companies like Rocket Lab, Relativity Space, they're experimenting with new, potentially game-changing propulsion technologies that could shake up space access even further.
And this whole multiplayer landscape raises the huge question of who ultimately controls Mars. New leaders, unchecked corporate power, an independent nation. The source draws some interesting historical parallels.
The governance question is absolutely critical. Will it be new elites calling the shots on the red planet? Could we see a dystopian Blade Runner scenario with a few mega corporations controlling vital resources and essentially the colonists' survival?
It's not entirely far-fetched.
Not when you consider that initially, at least, SpaceX would control almost everything. Food, water, power, oxygen. If one entity holds the keys to your life support, are you a citizen with rights or just a captive employee?
What's the more optimistic scenario?
Perhaps something closer to the Expanse's Mars that starts as a colony, but driven by the need for self-sufficiency and its own evolving society, eventually becomes an independent nation with its own laws, its own destiny.
Makes sense. The longer Martians live isolated from Earth's direct influence,
the stronger their own sense of identity will become, and the more inevitable the push for autonomy might seem. History on Earth shows us colonies rarely stay under the thumb of the mother country forever.
The American colonies didn't stay British.
And it's hard to imagine Mars staying under Earth's control indefinitely.
But there's one element the source highlights as maybe even more fundamental to running a Mars colony than any political system: artificial intelligence.
That's right. Musk himself has talked a lot about the critical role AI would play in maintaining and expanding a Martian colony. He points out that a major issue with Earth governments is inefficiency due to poor communication and coordination between different systems and databases.
On Mars, AI could manage things differently.
It could potentially monitor and control life support systems, manage water resources, oversee food production in controlled environments, optimize transport between settlements, even handle complex decision-making on a scale humans couldn't manage manually.
In such a hostile place.
With such limited resources, efficiency and automation become crucial. AI wouldn't be an option, it'd be a necessity. Mars might just be too dangerous and fragile for human inefficiency.
And this raises some really deep, maybe slightly unsettling questions about AI's role back here on Earth, too.
Exactly. At what point does an AI stop being just a tool serving us and start becoming an authority in its own right?
What happens when an AI makes objectively better decisions than humans about managing critical resources or responding to emergencies?
What are the ethics of having basic survival needs on Mars regulated by an entity that doesn't sleep, doesn't forget, doesn't negotiate? When does that AI cross the line from useful tool to a kind of quiet, pervasive authority?
And if Mars becomes the first place humans live under the constant management of intelligent machines?
Could that be a preview of the path Earth itself might eventually take? It's a profound thought.
Finally, the source also touches on the potential economic and global implications of Mars colonization. New industries, shifts in power balances.
An early Martian economy could spark entirely new industries. Mining asteroids rich in precious metals, space-based manufacturing taking advantage of vacuum or microgravity, developing tech specifically for extreme environments.
And this could leave some nations behind.
It could, yeah. Nations without a foothold in space might find themselves excluded from the next major industrial revolution. Global political alliances could completely reshuffle, and entire economies could be radically transformed.
Once a self-sufficient colony is established.
Mars stops being just a science experiment and becomes potentially a rival civilization with its own interests. And then, do we stop at Mars? Or do we keep going out into the solar system and maybe beyond?
The icy moons of Jupiter and Saturn?
With their subsurface oceans, yeah. The asteroid belt full of resources, maybe even generation ships heading to distant star systems eventually. The possibilities seem almost endless.
So the takeaway from the source seems to be that SpaceX's ambitions go way beyond just changing space travel. They're potentially redefining what it means to be human and our place in the universe. And the choices made in the coming decades could determine what Mars becomes. Just a corporate outpost, a thriving city, or maybe even a warning about relying too much on technology.
For the first time in our species' history, staying on Earth might actually become a conscious choice, not just a necessity imposed by the limits of our home planet.
A fundamental shift indeed.
No doubt about it.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's circle back to that initial question. Given this incredibly ambitious vision and the huge challenges still ahead, what future do you envision for humanity? One confined to Earth, or one that embraces the risks and possibilities of becoming multiplanetary?
It's a question that really pushes us to think about our place in the cosmos and, well, the boundless potential of our species.
And just to leave you with one final thought to chew on, considering the potential for a completely new society shaped by a harsh environment, pervasive AI, and a radical break from Earth's history, what fundamental aspects of human civilization do you think will survive intact, and what might be totally reinvented out there on the red plains of Mars? Something to ponder.